corner. As you can see, the YouTube link is now live, so you can share that link with your colleagues who were not able to, sign up to the call. Corner, as you can see, the YouTube link is now live, so you can share that link with your colleagues who were not able to. Okay. All right. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone. This is being done in partnership with Women at the Table, between Paradigm Initiative and Women at the Table. My name is Benga Shesong. I work for Paradigm Initiative, and I'm glad to welcome you. And just so that everyone knows, we will record today's conversation. And once I just get a nod to say yes from Chennai and Ambelona, I will go ahead to start recording. Chennai, it's okay to record. Okay, Ambelona, is it okay to record? Just in case, yes. So good. So no trade secrets being shared today. So let me just go ahead and quickly introduce our two guests. I hope we'll be able to see Ambelona, but even if we don't, at least you can see Chennai and I'm sure you can hear Ambelona as soon as we start. I'll start by introducing Ambelona. She's interested in research and entrepreneurship, and she's currently pursuing data science research projects that are specifically focused on revolutionizing the healthcare industry ethically. And our key area of interest is ethical AI, artificial intelligence in healthcare. Today, we're looking at artificial intelligence and human rights in Africa. And one of the questions that I've asked about this is, what has AI got to do with human rights in Africa? But today we've got this two awesome experts to help us understand not just AI and human rights in Africa, but also we're very interested. We're doing this in partnership with Women at the Table. We're also very strongly interested in feminist AI and all of the other conversations we will have today around that. Chennai is, so Ambelona is currently Associate Data Engineer at Outreach, and Chennai is currently Research Manager for Gender and Digital Rights at the World Wide Web Foundation. Chennai is a policy researcher with a focus on building evidence for pro-poor and public interest digital policy. She's currently exploring digital innovation and its impact on Africa's social and economic growth, as well as digital rights from a feminist perspective. You will now understand why we've asked both Chennai and Ambelona to kindly join us today to have this conversation. My job today is very simple. I'm just going to tease out the answers to make sure that I ask them the very tough questions so that they can give us as much information as possible. But what I want to do, to start is to give Ambelona and Chennai a chance to, just briefly introduce themselves. The information I've shared with you is what we have as public information. And they've made it easy, by the way, both of them. Their Twitter handle is also on the flyer. It's on the page where you registered, and also it's their name. So you can tweet at them after now to ask questions. Tough questions and simple questions and all. But I'm going to give, both Ambelona and Chennai a chance to introduce themselves and tell us one thing that they're currently working on and are excited about. We'll start with you, Ambelona. On this call today, it's BCG, Ambelona, Chennai, Benga. So we'll do the alphabetical thing. BCG sounds like vaccine, but it's not the vaccine, even though we're all excited about the news of the vaccine for the coronavirus. But Ambelona, over to you now. Tell us, what is not in the field that is read, and also one thing that is very exciting that they're working on right now as far as yeah.
Okay, thank you for the floor. I'm Ambelona Sona. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are. As you said, I'm interested in ethics AI applied in healthcare. Next year, I will join a team in Australia to start my PhD. I graduated last year machine intelligence in Rwanda. But for now, I'm data engineer at Altrace in Morocco, as you said. I'm working remotely, and actually we are working with a partner in a specific project, trying to detect toxicity in how to say it, for people who are looking for location of, or are looking for where they will stay. They want to rent house. Actually, we want them to publish message that are not toxic for people. But in the same time, I'm a member of Afro Leadership and non organization government in Cameroon, where I'm the manager of ethics and gender issue. So this is all about me. Let's say about Afro leadership now. We are trying to work on projects that we have help women to be involved in AI career in general. We are also plan to do many activities or research that will help women to promote women in Cameroon or in Africa in general. That's all about me.
Thank you. Now, Chennai, the floor is yours. The mic over to you.
Thank you so much, Benga. BCG actually reminds me of Boston Consulting Group before the vaccine. So yeah, just to follow on. Thank you for having me on this panel. My name is Janai, and I am a Zimbabwean based in South Africa. I always think that's relevant in terms of the scope of work that I end up doing. I'm currently a research manager at the Web Foundation, focused on gender and digital rights. But I was also and I speak in past tense because it's coming to an end, a 2019-2020 Mozilla Tech Policy Fellow. And in that work, that's where I had the opportunity to, I think I would carry out a dream or an idea that I had around what is the impact of AI-based systems and innovations in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, thinking about the issues around gendered inequality. So today I'm actually quite excited. When you were asking me, what are you working on? I'm currently working on sharing the launch of my project, which is called mydataRights.africa. And in that work, it documents the whole experience of actually taking a look at the issues around AI and digital rights. And what I actually specifically focus on was AI, privacy, and data protection in South Africa through a feminist lens. So the project has really been eye-opening in terms of thinking of building up on the conversation that the work that Ambelona does in terms of including women's participation in these spaces, but to actually think about the current the issues around privacy and data protection when AI is being developed, given the findings that we have around discrimination, bias, and surveillance, and what it particularly means for marginalized groups, and in our context, women and sexual minorities. So that actually has been like the most exciting thing about today, being able to share this project and reflect on it and being able to have this conversation with other people as well. So that's my introduction today.
Great. Thank you so much. So one thing I want us to thanks so much, Bellona and Chennai. One thing I want us to quickly do is to take a poll. Would like to measure, what's in the room. The way today is going to go is I'm going to spend the next, and we're perfectly on time. We were supposed to do this until 11:10. For the next 45 minutes, I'm going to have a conversation with Bellona and Chennai to ask questions about our theme and also build on their responses to be able to get a lot more information on AI and human rights in Africa. And by 10:55 GMT, we'll open this up for questions that participants have directly for either Bellona or Chennai. And depending on how many questions we get, I also have a few more questions. But before we do that, I would like to launch a quick poll. It will appear on your screen. And if you could please take that in 1 minute, then, or less, actually, you only need to just read for a few seconds and then take the poll. Based on the response, we will have our first question. And here you go. Poll on your screen right now. Oh, wow, interesting. Okay. Okay, interesting. 81% have voted. I'm sure we'll see the results of this poll before Ghanaians know their new president, or before Donald Trump accepts that he's no longer the president of the United States. So we've got 20 votes in. There are 2 people who are abstaining. I'll just give them 10 seconds to see if they're interested in voting or not. And the countdown begins, and the countdown begins, and the countdown ends. Okay. So I'm going to share the results. We've got 21 votes out of 22 in. I didn't vote as the electoral chairman, so that I won't be biased. And I'm sharing the results with you now, so you can see. That's what we have. Human rights in Africa, what's AI got to do with it? 15, that's 71% of people on the call think, or the webinar, think everything. And 29% or 6 people think something. So my first question to you, okay, yes, Nima says there's a lot of bias. Unfortunately, we can't measure for bias in this, but the good news is that I am actually going to start, this. Okay, I'm going to start with my first question to you, Bernard, and Chennai, is this. So you've seen this. And as Nima said, there's a bit of bias here. So it looks like the people on the call today, obviously, are people who are interested in AI and human rights. Just if you take a cursory look at the names on this list, you can see some of the usual suspects, right, in the space. But the question to you is this: what was your choice, if you don't mind sharing, and why did you choose that? Why did you say nobody chose nothing? So why did you say everything or something? Let's start with you, Belona.
Okay, please could you explain the question? I'm not sure to get the question, please.
Oh, yes. So in terms of artificial intelligence and human
Okay.
rights in Africa, 71% of people say it has everything to do with it. So we need to talk about AI when we talk about human rights, because they're, kind of intertwined. What's your view on this? Is it strongly intertwined, or is it a topic we can just like basically do away with?
Um, Actually, it's a really good question, and I really think that it's time for us to put down artificial intelligence in human right, because artificial intelligence is adopted in our real life every time, either in healthcare, either in education. Everywhere now you will see artificial intelligence being used. Using artificial intelligence also means that we accept in our life to use these tools. It also means that at some point in our life, um, our human rights are exposed in the sense that nowadays, if you are curious about artificial intelligence, you will see that there are a raise of many concerns about artificial intelligence, such as ethics issues, such as privacy, violating privacy, such as many things that have been raised due to the use of AI in our daily life. So I think that I'm sure that if we don't pay attention, this artificial intelligence can violate or impact our human right. That is why I think that we should really think about AI now, since that Africans, if I can say it, it's not like we are not using AI in Africa, but for now we are not on the top. We're still not on the top. We are still learning about AI. We are still understanding AI. There are some people, there are some countries that are not even they don't even have one application based on AI. It means that we are not on the top of AI, but we know that we need AI in our life to develop our countries, to develop our continent. So it's time for us to think about AI, and think about AI by our own view. Think about AI ethically. think about AI and his impact in our human rights. So for me, it's all. We should think about AI and human rights. The debate is okay for me.
Thank you so much, Bellona. And you got us started on something already, but I'll come back to that in terms of ethics. Deborah, thank you for your comment. Please keep the conversation going also in the chat. Chena, I'm coming to you now. I know what you chose. So the only question is why?
I think it's, well, I mean, Benga would know, but obviously I chose everything. I mean, having worked over the last couple of years within the ICT space, what you realize is that there is a tendency for any new technology to have this like proliferated life existence where it then shapes every aspect of our lives, whether it is from the public sector, private sector, or as us as individuals trying to find solutions to the problems we face on the continent. And immediately in that thinking is that one might be tempted to say technology is neutral, it's not embedded in context, and it exists on its own. But the true reality is that everything that we interact with, whether it be a technology form or analog form, actually shapes our lives and experiences, therefore shapes our human rights. So at the end of the day, for me, despite we're in this context where we have, I think, about 30% of the sub-Saharan African continent makes use of the internet, but just because I have access as an individual to the continent and therefore creating a digital footprint on my own, how many times are we laughing at photos of babies on social media that their parents have posted, but they don't have a digital devices yet, so they wouldn't be counted as connected or having some form of data if you're looking at it at a very top level. So then when you begin to realize it, and when you look at the way in which we interact with technology at our different levels of access on a spectrum, everything that we interact with would shape how we experience human rights. And I think in our context, what we do know is that there are certain people who are likely to be aware of their human rights, who are likely able to exercise their rights. But then there's also the marginalized groups of people who end up supplying most of this data to refine these systems, but are in political and social economic contexts that challenge their human rights on a daily basis. And when technology is applied to that layer, what you end up having is just like, okay, here's another means for us to then challenge that human rights aspect. So for me, the reality is that when you think about artificial intelligence as a new emerging technology, you'll find that other pundits will say there's going to be another technology in 10 years, like we had blockchain last year. No offense to everyone who's like really big on blockchain, but then you find for me, it's about the fact that technology shapes our lives and we shape it. So at the end of the day, it does have an impact on human rights. And then we have to place it in our context of human rights being challenged by the politics, by the society, by the economy, and therefore it extends to the same when it comes to technology. So that's why I voted for everything.
Everything. All right. Let me stay with you for a second, Chennai. You got us started on something here, and I want to stay with you, but I want to take you back a bit, right? So what, in your view, is the status? And I know this is a very broad question, so please apply as narrow as perspective to it as possible, just because of time. I know you could lecture us for the next 48 hours on human rights in Africa, but what would you, in 2 or 3 sentences, say characterizes the status of human rights in Africa right now? And I'm going to come back with a second question, but let me allow you to say that first. What would you say is the status as far as human rights is concerned in Africa right now?
So what we have, I think, well, 2 to 3 sentences. I'm going to try to do my best. But in some, I would say in some contexts, we have amazing human rights protocols and processes in place on paper. And then when it comes to implementation, we are lagging in certain African contexts, indicated by the political state. Just look at what we do when elections are happening in certain countries where we wonder, are they going to win genuinely or not? If you look at just the levels of poverty existent on the continent, challenges around gender equality, and basically youthful employment, you find that in some, we have beautiful protocols that ensure human rights, but the practical application is highly challenged by the political economic environments, the resources, our history of colonialization and apartheid in some countries. And so therefore, we are in that place of, on paper, brilliant, on implementation, we have work to do.
Thank you. That's what some of my colleagues would call a paper tiger. It looks weird, like it looks like it's going to attack you, but it's just the worst it can do is a paper cut. So Bellona, let me come to you now and ask you the same question. When you look at this view, so and I'm glad that Chena introduced herself as coming from Southern Africa, as struggling through two countries. You are from Central Africa. What is your view of human rights in Africa right now in 2 or 3 sentences?
Okay, she was very clear. In terms of protocols and processes, I think everything is already set down, but it's just the way that we apply it that is very different. Or I can even say we don't really apply it, if I can if I can say it. But actually, everything is clear that we need. For example, we need health, we need many things, we need education, but society. We live under our government, we live under many rules, and most of the time those people don't really care about population, they don't really care about the development of the country, they don't really care about human rights. They are just there to make their time and run the country just as they think that is good for us, for all of us. But most of the time they don't really think about the people who are facing this challenge in real life. She was talking about gender equalities. When people are talking gender equalities in abroad, let's say not in Africa, it's really easy to talk about this topic. But in Africa, it's a bit different because even our traditional roles in Africa, we keep our traditional role, we keep it, it's really important for us. But these traditional rules don't really allow women in Africa to think about gender equality. So I think that, as she really said, she was really clear, everything is set down. It's the same in Central Africa or in South Africa or everywhere in Africa. I think things are set down, but the problem is how we apply it in the real life.
Okay, so Deborah, I see your comment about, and we'll come back to that, about Africa not being a country and being a diverse continent, and to be specific in terms of country. But I think that what Bellona and Chena have just said are country specific, but also very applicable within the entire region, across countries. Some countries do better than others. For example, Ghana went to elections yesterday. Everybody knew Ghana would not shut down the internet. When Ethiopia or a Tanzania go to elections, we kind of worry they may shut down the internet. So yes, we know there's a lot of variety. And I'm going to stay with you for a second, Bellona. So congratulations, by the way, you're starting your PhD next year. Looking at your profile, clearly, this is something you're very uber excited about. Tell us a bit more in terms of what is, maybe even why are you, spending 3-4 years focusing on AI? What have you seen that others have not seen as far as AI is concerned in Africa? What is this AI thing we're all excited about, and where are we as a continent versus where we need to be?
Okay, that is a great question, because when I started my university studies, I just did computer science. I got my first master degree in 2016, and then during this topic, my first master thesis, I was working on computer vision. And when I started to do my research, I discovered artificial intelligence, and I was excited by the advantage that we had when we use AI compared to traditional method that I had to use at that time. That is why I decided to to work in AI. I mean, I enter in AI field just to make my life easy in my study. But by the way, I got a chance to be accepted in a scholarship in Rwanda, founded by African Institution of Mathematical Science. The program is called AMI, African Master in Machine Intelligence. But when I went there and we started the program, I was wow. AI was not just like an algorithm that you can take and you apply it in your life. Actually, when you decide to make a model, an artificial intelligence model, it's like you are feeding or you are breeding a child. It's just the same way that you have your child and you feed your child, and the way it grows and the way you teach him is just the way he will behave in the future. When I discovered it, I was like, okay, so it's not like the other technology that we Africans we had to just import it in our system and just use it. I noticed that if we as African we still want to just import this technology from abroad and use it, we will bias our population, we will discriminate our population, because when you are building AI, you should fit the environment where the AI will be used. That's why I wanted to focus on the AI and in my PhD, or in the future, not even in PhD, even in research, because first of all, I believe that if we really want our AI to fit our environment, there are some people who should work about the protocols, about the rules, and to reach that level, we need people who do research behind, so that they make sure that the type of AI we will build for Africa will be best for Africa. This is the first thing. That is the first decision that why I decided to do the PhD. The second thing is that nowadays most of the Africans who learn AI, they learn it from abroad, because for now we don't have an institution, university there that can teach AI to people in Africa. They are not allowed. For now, we can have two or three somewhere. I mean, I don't want to say, I don't want to talk for all the countries as someone on the line in the comment. I just want to say that the rate of university of education made by Africa for Africans is not high. So we need lecturer to teach people. We need people who did research in the area, focus on Africa, so that they will teach others. That is the two reasons that I want to focus 3-4 years and even more in AI, just to ensure that our education will be made by Africans and our product will be developed thinking about Africa.
Thank you so much, Bellona. And, thinking of Africa and AI, I can't but think of the ongoing controversy in Google, with a leading researcher who has been fired. I do not intend to make this conversation about that, but I think it's just important, to know that as Africans, we need to stand up. We're talking about rights anyway, but I'll leave that there. Before I come to you, Chennai, with the same question, there's an important, comment that our friend Orabil has raised here in terms of the need for us to understand the level of access and how much data we even have before we start, talking of building models and things like that. And I think, that's a very important point. A good question from my boss, Thobekile, who I hope does not fire me for doing a subpar job today, is in terms of if we have enough understanding on the continent within traditional human rights organizations. I will park that question for now, because I have a funny feeling that answer could take us in a different trajectory entirely. But let me come now to you, Chennai. You actually have a project that you're launching right now. I mean, like, you've launched. Why did you have to do that? Why did you embark on that project? What are the things you found that you think we need to know about? And what are those landmines that you think we need to look out for when we talk about, AI as far as Africa is concerned? And we're deliberately being geographic in this conversation. I know there are people who will feel, oh, this is a global conversation, but context matters. And that's why, I'd love for you to answer those questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benga. Glad I don't have the 2 to 3 sentences cap. Okay, cool. So I'll be reflecting on my project, which I just launched, MyDataRights.Africa. And for me to actually do this work started from a place of curiosity, as I've always done with all of my technology. It's to really wonder, okay, there's this conversation that's going on about like, oh, content moderation. And then you figure out that at the end, they're using like artificial intelligence systems. Then you read Sophia Noble's work of algorithms of oppression. And then you begin to wonder, so algorithms of oppression documents how the Google search engines, when you searched for young Black girls, the content that came out was really sexualized and pornographic. So she was trying to find information for her young Black girls, and it was not reflective. And this is an American context, by the way. And then when I began to look for more and more like African-based context, what I continuously found were the narratives around Fourth Industrial Revolution, the narratives around we need to have more women in STEM so that we can have AI readiness. And then you find this investment that's being done. So I'm very grateful for institutions like AIMS, other institutions that are setting up capacity to capacitate the continent. But oftentimes the conversation is then you have this race to artificial intelligence, as was seen with the race to mobile phones, the race to the internet, but there is no critical engagement of what the impact is on society. So for me to do this work, which I was fortunate enough that this was Mozilla's, this is now Mozilla's future work, 2021, 2023. They're looking on trustworthy AI within the commercial space. I had the opportunity to actually get funding to do a very small project. And I think what makes my work unique is that it takes on a feminist perspective. So it's moving away from most conversations that we've seen where, if you look at the final my policy paper that I put out, the key things that really come out with the AI discourse on the African continent is about building the necessary skills, very important. And also building the necessary skills so that we can be global economic players. The conversation around like the context and what can be done, then when you speak to other developers or people who are working within the AI for development network, you then begin to realize that the conversation on the societal impact, the work on documenting what has been done, say, for example, in the work on data feminism or algorithms of oppression, it's missing. And that for me comes back to the point that was raised by Orabile, that we need to know the level to which data is available. And because I'm not a technician, I took the other route of actually centering marginalized communities and trying to figure out to what extent are they engaging with these issues, to what extent are they concerned about the proliferation of AI, because we all know that the first time that most people use the internet, and this is based on research that was done by Research ICT Africa, and anyone who's done research on why people make use of the internet the first time on the African continent, it's mainly because of social media. So our first, our first interaction that we're having with artificial intelligence-based systems is through those platforms. And so then when you look at the conversation in Europe and in the US, it's really mainly from protecting individual rights. But when you locate our conversation around ICTs and technology development on the African continent, it's really about that community response. What is the impact at a community level? How do we actually come together as a community to fight these systems, right? Or how do we come together as a community to actually make use of these opportunities? It's not just an individual conversation. So for me, that what drove me to do this research, I'm a curious person, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, what I'm reading is not reflecting who I am. And I need to figure out a way of actually being responsive. And then touching slightly on the question that Tabekele raised, and I know it's parked, the lack of a data justice movement on the continent, right? And by data justice, it's literally thinking about how we have control over our data, the kind of ownership, the governance models, and thinking about the different thinking about the different digital rights movements and how then they're working together with existing human rights and social justice movements to actually be like, okay, what's going on with our data on these platforms? Is it relevant to us? And how do we actually ensure that these new technologies, even when they are being built by Africans for Africans, do not exacerbate the same inequalities that we live in? Are we having those conversations? Am I able to actually like sit with Ambelona, we design something and we design it in a way that Sasha Constanza has talked about as design justice, but we can come up with our own terms. This is literally me borrowing terms that have evolved from a different continent, but just goes to show the lack of data, the lack of documentation, and the opportunity that we have to actually say, this is what we would like for our AI and human rights system to look like based on our community values, whereas in Southern Africa, it's usually Bantu system values. So that's where my conversation stepped into this. I hope I answered all the questions.
Well, I have more, so don't worry. And I'll stay with you for a moment. And you've said something that I think is really important, which is that we need to define what our AI and human rights system needs to look like. We all know that African governments, sort of policy lags behind innovation, typically. And very soon you're going to start finding, in fact, we already have some national budgets that have AI in them, and it's going to be procurement mostly. You know, they're going to be procuring things around AI. If it has AI name on it, they procure it, especially if it's sold with, you know, by someone with a white face, you know, and non-black hair. Now, but the question is, how do we ensure that we design and promote that, you know, AI and human rights context that we think, because don't forget, these are two different things that governments do not have a right attitude to. So first of all, human rights is not, we don't have the best record in many of our countries, and AI, the attitude to it is mostly, you know, procurement and things like that. How do we then design this? What are the things we need to look out for within, for example, the context of Zimbabwe, within the context of Southern Africa, and across the continent? What do we need to look out for? Not the landmines now. What are the, if we're playing Pokemon Go, what are these, you know, opportunities of catching points, you know, for us as we build, and what does that picture look like for you?
Thanks, Benga. This nicely sets me up for the recommendations that I actually put forward. Although they were specific to privacy and data protection, they do touch on this like emerging uptake of AI technologies by governments, public sector, and even nonprofits. So the first thing that I point out is that there's opportunity for policy and regulation that's being developed. Right, so there's new opportunities for policy and regulation. I'll give you the example of South Africa, where the Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission that does look at AI as well put together the suggestion for an AI institute. And I think at that perspective, in this context, there's room for civil society, nonprofit organizations, the legal community, and the technical community to actually collaborate and then indicate the necessary safeguards that need to be put in, and also advocate for particular resources to monitor the collection of procurement, to actually be able to have some of these, they're actually open data policies. So if you can leverage, or access to information policies that already existent, those can be leveraged. We don't need to do something new in particular. We need to make use of access to information policies in countries that do have them, to then be able to have access to these procurement documents. And then secondly, my favorite thing is that a low-hanging fruit is research and documentation. I was fortunate enough to have funding from Mozilla to be able to do this. But what my project actually then put forward is we started mapping where we had found, I was working with a research assistant, where we could find AI. And I think there's an opportunity for collaboration to actually set up a system where people can share what they find on AI. And I'm hoping if anyone's on the call and is interested to collaborate on this, to actually document, and this was done in Netherlands, for example, where they have an AI register. So any AI system that's put into the public space is documented on that AI register. And that's information like where is it, who accesses it, and like who's interacting with it. This is something that can be done with collaboration. And then I think the third thing that's so important, because most of the times it's around public awareness. So you don't know you're interacting with the AI until you discover, oops, looks like I could have been interacting with a robot here that's AI based. So it's really important then for us in this room and beyond to think about public awareness. How do we, I mean, like it's interesting how we've gone through this conversation and have not defined AI, but I'm going to defer that one to Belona. So you know, it's most of the times it's like, how do people actually understand what artificial intelligence is? And I often start from the point of automated decision making or algorithms, because that seems to be the low hanging fruit for people to actually understand how they interact with the system. So, and then I think, and I think lastly, the responsibility of the technical community. And this is why I'm so excited to have Belona on this call, because oftentimes you see who's leading the conversations are your big organizations of Facebook, Mozilla, Google. You know, they set up the AI research ethics teams, and they, you know, they do the work because they've got the resources. But I think our own local technical community, because we've got brilliant people, would actually be able to you know, to respond to issues of like, how do we define it? How do we know it's existent? And how do we actually make use of the technology so that we don't have to spend so many hours like putting the data together, but make use of it in those opportunities? And I think that for me responds to the question of then, so how can we prepare? And they seem for me like they're low-hanging fruits that just require collaboration, and hopefully, if someone's listening, funding as well.
Funding as well. He who pays the piper dictates the tune. You know, I will say this, you know, a lot of my friends in Google know what I think about Dr. Timid Gabriel's, you know, firing. I think it's an absolute travesty. I think it reveals the underbelly of big organizations and bias. And I say this conscious of the fact that I'm building an organization myself, and one day I may, if we're not careful, we may be accused of the same thing. But that's the reason why I think it's important for us to surround ourselves with people who can give us honest feedback, and that we can take them. But even, let's leave the large organizations and growing organizations for a second. Like you mentioned, Chennai. So Bellona is one of our technical community, you know, AI leaders right now. And I'm glad, you know, that we now have a chance that you've talked about funding. This is why we need to begin to build our muscle around making sure that for our various organizations, AI, feminist AI, and the topics that matter to us become part of our agenda, so that as we build our resource base, we can then afford to engage people like Bellona to say, Bellona, go ahead and do research, no questions asked, and nobody is going to fire you for releasing a report that we don't believe in, because I think that is manipulative and terrible. So let's come to you now, Bellona. You know, the same question, you know, that I asked. What should we be looking out to do? Or let me even make this very specific to you, since Chennai has mentioned that. What are the things that you are looking out for already, not just in terms of building, you know, the AI and human rights framework that we desire, but also what are your concerns? And I can imagine that when you heard that Dr. Gabriel was fired, it may have occurred to you that, well, I really wanted to work for them, but maybe they'll fire me too and things like that. What are your concerns? Because when we begin to voice these concerns, we can then begin to mitigate them and build a power structure. Because regardless of what we think about power, it is not served, as a politician says in Nigeria, it's not served a la carte. You have to build power for it, and you have to get it. So what do we need to do to help you, the technical community, and help ourselves to make sure that we don't propose systems, but that we build them and have the power to implement?
Okay, before I answer the question, I will just mention that if I'm also interested in ethics AI, is because of Timnit. She has been my lecturer in Rwanda. She was doing social and ethics of AI. That is why, just the way she teach me, I wanted to do ethics AI. Okay, to answer the question, for the tech community, as she said, the problem is funding. You know, if someone funds your project, you are somehow obliged to produce this report that he wants. So concerning the tech community, what I can say is that the first thing that we need is to be supported by our countries, our continent. It means that we should engage people in Africa who believe in trustworthy AI for Africa that can fund research projects in Africa. This is the first thing, because whatever you do, if you are going to do your research abroad, or you are working for this big organization and they pay your research, at the end of the day, whatever you found in your result, you are obliged to pay attention of their own needs, right? So the first thing that we want is funding Africans, funding by African that believe in African, that have Africans belief. And secondly, I think that the more we demystify AI, the more people will understand the behind of AI. And to demystify AI, it comes with education, a lot of education. We should educate people, because as I used to say, AI is not just an algorithm. Applying or building AI is like you are building something that will affect your life. It's something that will reflect the way the people who build this model think, how they consider life, how they see the right solution. I can take an example. Let's say that I'm building an AI model that will help me, for example, to differentiate the good and the bad. The good and the bad for me depend of my own belief, right? If I consider that this result is good for me, it cannot be the same for you. And to make things easy for everyone, we should first also define what is good for us. It can be what is good for Cameroon or for Zimbabwe, or we can really think you can take the continent like a one country and define what type of AI we need. What is the good AI we want? Because when I was doing my internship with Montreal Ethics of AI, we had an activity called defining the right. What is right? And when we did this activity, we noticed that what Africans wanted, because there were three or five Africans in this program. What we consider good was not the same for people abroad. So it's not like we just copy the protocols for people abroad and apply it in Africa. No, we should define our own protocol, as Shenai said, and then we should also demystify AI. We should decolonize AI as well, and also for technique people, a tech community as me, we should make sure that we really pay attention about minorities when we are collecting data, and we make sure that we are using the right methods to not be unfair with some people, or not discriminate people by our own product. This is all I can add.
Thank you so much, Pelona. Chena, let me come back to you. The two elephants, well, not elephants actually, the two big things that I really want us to talk about, over the next few minutes and during the question and answer time. We have some questions already. One is ethics, and the other is feminist AI. And I know that these are things that we can talk about forever. But the reason why we wanted to host this conversation today is to start something. Many times this conversation start from face-to-face, virtual face-to-face meetings like this, and then we can continue the conversation, through various channels. But in your own view, what is the most important, what are the most important things we need to keep in mind when we talk about the need for ethics in AI? Yes, we know that bias is something that is a bit subtle and at times not so subtle, but what are the other things that you think we need to keep in mind? Let's start with you, Chena, in terms of ethics on AI. What are your thoughts? And if we can, focus this maybe a bit on the context of the continent, that would be very helpful.
Thanks, Benga. So I think I'm thinking about things that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about AI ethics. I'm not even going to touch on the ethics on their own, but I'm going to think about like what makes us able to come together on a table and discuss this conversation of ethical principles. And I think what you've rightly mentioned from the beginning is context, right? And then that comes also into the conversation. Like, we're using human rights language, but we also know that certain countries are very reluctant to use human rights language. But we're in this conversation and accepting it as if it's a norm. So that for me is also, when we think about ethical principles, to what extent are the people in policymaking spaces, the people who are developers, actually thinking about these ethical principles as a given or from a very critical perspective? And then when you take into account language, right? Does ethics translate into each and every language in the same way as where the conversation around ethical principles in AI has started from? And I think that way comes the distinction between the individual versus the community focus around, setting up ethical guidelines around ethical principles around AI, and how best do we do this, and how best do we focus on this conversation. And then I think also, sometimes when we enter these conversations around ethical principles and developing the right ethical standards, it's also about power conversations. What I consider to be ethical and should be included into a system, if I, as you rightly said, she who pays the bill, or she who pays the piper, can be able to determine what I think is of value because of who I am and what my location is. And I think that's where oftentimes I was in a conversation with UNESCO. They were developing AI principles for the African continent. Gender and sexuality was a very difficult thing to bring into the conversation around ethical principles for the continent. But morality was very easy. It was, we have to make sure that we bring in these systems that do not challenge our African morality. And I began to question, what is African morality as according to your standards, right? Does that African morality mean the same? Does that mean that if someone decides to create an application, an AI-based application that offers information around sexual reproductive health rights in countries that may perhaps have not legalized abortion, for example, does that mean that they have violated those ethical principles? So that for me is what I think about when it comes to the conversation of principle, the power involved, the context, the local language translation, and also thinking about who is participating in the room. So then this comes from like feminist principles of thinking, where you think about who actually is in the room, who's designing these principles. Are these principles that have been designed then translatable to someone who's going to be interacting with Facebook for the first time in 2 years, when they finally have a device and they've got internet connection? Will they actually understand that these ethical principles translate into that particular context? So I've avoided touching on exactly what ethical AI would be, because I want us to take one step back to think about the process to actually getting to developing these ethical AI principles. And is it the necessary thing for our context? Now, I'll leave that one as a debatable comment, because we know we're all engaging in different spaces where everyone, the first thing that you get there when you talk about is around principles of AI, of ethical AI. So that for me is also quite interesting. And I think one more thing to point out is that ethics has actually become an industry. So you'll find people setting up ethical institutions, as in the case that we've seen with Google. So now you've got this whole ethical institution, you've tick-boxed that you've addressed ethics. But to what extent is your whole structure and who is participating, that interpretation of ethics, is there a cap to how far one can be ethical? And this is what we've seen with the case of Dr. Timnit Gebru, where you've challenged the system, maybe goes against our ethics, so we now have to kick you out. So that's the conversation that we need to have.
Thank you. You are definitely a good panelist who takes the question, mixes it up, and then throws it back as a question. You earned the badge. Okay, so I'll come to you, Ambelona, now. When we talk about ethics, and I do not expect that we will define ethics, or even, have a permanent agreement on what would we define as the best, terms around AI ethics on the continent here. But what are your thoughts on what are the things you've worked on around conversations around ethics when it comes to AI? And like I said, once we take this, then we'll start taking questions and then talk a bit more about applying feminist principles and feminist AI in general.
Okay, this is a really difficult question, but I believe that ethics AI is an AI that's acceptable for a community, for a specific community. It means that, as she said, Shinai said, it's really difficult to decide what is good for people. People know, the people who use a specific model or specific solution, they are the one who should define if the model is right for them or not. So for me, in general speaking, I will say that ethics AI is an AI which is good for people who will use that solution. But now, how can we do to ensure that the AI that we publish is okay for this community? We should care about this community when building the solution. We should care about their belief. We should care about the minority inside the communities. We should make sure that we can trust this model. Because the other problem, the other concern of ethics about AI is that most of the model that has been used, they are not explainable. No one can really understand how the decision is, how the decisions are taken. No one can really cannot really say, okay, this model choose this decision because of this, because the model are not explainable. So we just believe, like, it's like we leave something that we don't understand lead our life. That is why it's a bit difficult. So I also think that when you are building AI in tech community, we should really pay attention about the metrics we use to really ensure that people won't be harmed by this solution. This is what I can say.
Thank you very much. The point that you ended with is absolutely important, and that's why I'm glad that we have you and Chennai here. So you both sort of represent different dimensions of your approach. Policy, technical, to this, and you're very right. You've both spoken to this, the need. If you're not on the table, you cannot contribute to the ethics conversation, right? The popular saying is that if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. That's why I'm glad that we're doing this today with women at the table, actually, because the name is very, very significant, and we're not talking about tokenism here, because like Chenny I mentioned earlier, now we have institutions that sort of tick the box and say, you know what, we've hired 2 Black people, yeah, we're diverse. We've hired one person who has natural hair. Okay, we're kind of diverse, and things like that. But now we have a few questions here. We've got 3 questions, and I want us to switch to the second half of this conversation now. And they've, we've got 2 questions from Orabili. Let me start with the first one. So I've been looking to get some thoughts from experts around this question. How should the concept of machine consciousness, how should that concept influence approaches to AI governance in Africa? I mean, we all have access to these questions anyway. So who would want to start with that? Do you want to start with that, Chennai, since we just heard from Bellona?
So I'm going to take that. Like, I have not thought about that, and I will not be able to respond to it. And when just take 2 minutes out and hear what Bellona says.
Right.
So that's what is. I'll make note of it to actually look into it and see if there's anything I can add onto it.
Absolutely. That's good. Bellona, do you have some thoughts on this already, or is this something you actually?
Yes, I can say some few words. Okay, I think that matching. Hello.
Yeah, please
Hello.
go ahead.
Okay, it's true. When he said, I don't know, when you said machine consciousness, do you mean that we should make sure that our the machine take good decision? I don't know, because if I understand the question, it's like you want to know how the machine influence the governance of, I mean, people who take decision for Africa. Is that the question?
So let me actually give the mic to Orabile so that he can ask this question since he's here. A politician in Nigeria says you can't shave a man's head in his absence. So let me allow him to talk. Please, you can unmute your mic and ask the question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Clearly.
Oh, fantastic. Actually, Belona, that is correct. When I talk about machine consciousness in this aspect, I am actually looking at how AI technologies are actually trained using different data sets to make decisions on behalf of human beings. So I just thought I should maybe clarify that.
Okay, actually, how I consider AI, I think that when we say that AI should help human being or take decision, it's not like they should take the final decision, because the role of AI in decision making is to propose solution. At the end of the day, it's still human being who should take decision according on the decision that the AI took, but also on the context. You know what I mean? You understand what I mean? So my thought about the question is that we shouldn't give the whole responsibility to the AI machine to take this decision for our country. We should because AI have the power to deal with complex parameter to take the final decision. We should give this opportunity to the AI to take the decision. But actually, when the decision to propose, not to take the decision, to propose a decision, to propose what should be done, and then we should also leave the opportunity to the human being who know the context to see if the decision is okay or not. So for me, yes, we need AI in Africa to take the right decision, but we just need AI to mix all these parameters together and take something that he thinks that is right, and then leave human being take the final decision, because at the end of the day, it's the human being who should be responsible of that decision. You will never see someone say, I took this decision because the computer told me that. It doesn't mean anything. So the computer should help you to propose you one decision, and you and human being, you appreciate the decision, the impact of that decision on human being before you publish or you use it on people. This is my response about this question.
Thank you. I see what you did there, making sure that we limit the machine to proposing and not taking action. I like that. So Chenai, Orobile does not want you to go scot-free. He has a specific question with your name to it, postmarked with your name. It says, Chenai, do we then conclude that AI in Africa has a gender problem? ITU and ILO both provide less systematically gender disaggregated data on AI-related indicators. How would we then determine this deficit with no data in place? Interesting.
Thanks, Arabile. I mean, just to quickly second exactly what Belona said around the machine consciousness. I think one of the critical questions then to ask is whose consciousness is being represented as the system develops and then is able to integrate into systems. And that's where the challenge of bias and discrimination comes in, because the system is developed as according to who is representative. And then if you're bringing it into a governance space, whose governance model is working, and do you have, so the proposed model works better for me, because we also can't say humans don't have their own issues, but I think we cannot then just say because it's a technology that's more advanced and more intelligent, it will not make an error. And so then on the question, AI has a gender problem. Whether be it in Africa, whether be it in Europe, whether be it in any continent. And it's not just AI, technology has a gender problem. Right. And so then what we're focusing on today is technology. But if you take 10 steps back, you can come with mobile phones. I remember someone published a research, which is quite interesting, and I hadn't thought about it. The design of it fits easily into a man's hand, and then when you try to put it in a woman's hand, it's sort of like a battle just to keep the phone on your device. Work that's been done around invisible women, for example. So then with regards to the issue around data, I think this is the recommendation that I put forward, and this is the work that has been done in the work of data feminism, where then there's a need for us to work with different social justice movements in actually documenting experiences and moving away from, your standard surveys, focus group discussions, which I am part of in the system, but to actually think of more participatory action research design approaches that are able to document the opportunities and challenges. I keep on hitting the point of opportunities, because at the end of the day, there are some solutions that have come up that address issues that women face. I'll give you the example of Soul City in South Africa launched what they call Rainbow. It's an AI system that's meant to support gender-based violence victims and survivors by offering them information, by chatting to them about their opportunities. So then you can see that there are opportunities that are involved in that. So the documentation is about how women and gender diverse people are actually making use of AI, and then also where the data gaps are. And that's why I would actually encourage people to look at data feminism, and the work that's been done by CIS in India. I will look up the acronym. But then what then happens is, if you rely on ITU and ILO for data, what you're going to have is data that is palatable, that is numbers, that works in big policy recommendation conversations. So your percentages, your gender disaggregated data. But if you begin to think creatively out of the box, you're going to have research that documents experiences of young people. I saw a question being raised about young people, of gender diverse people, and how they experience technology. So this also then comes into the way in which we design these systems. So what is the data we value? And then what is the solution that we're trying to get at? Because at the end of the day, there is a gender problem regardless of what issue you're looking at, because someone then wakes up 10 years later and says, oops, we forgot the women, the gender diverse, and the sexual minorities. Let's now start working on it.
Your comment about we forgot the women, and this is very real, by the way, in terms of if you've been in the room where policy is made many times, you will see that there are so many afterthoughts. We forgot the young people, we forgot the women, we didn't even think about it. And of course, when you look around the table, you understand why they forgot, because it is not their lived experience, and they have no connection whatsoever. By the way, you were referring to Center for Internet and Society in India, and I retweet and endorse the recommendation on checking out the data feminism. Oh, thank you, Gabriel. One of my colleagues has also shared the link to the website. So I'll come to you now, Ambelona. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that question, or if I should go to the next question for you.
Okay, but for the last question, I can just say that gender issue is something that we face since decades, and the problem is that AI emphasizes this issue in real life. That is why it's time to think about or to pay attention on feminist AI or gender issue in AI, because AI emphasize this thing in real life, emphasize this issue in real life. It's not a new problem. Gender issue is not a new problem, but the problem is that based on the scale and the impact of AI in real life, the problem is emphasized.
Thank you. So let me come to the next question. And Deborah feels very strongly about this because she typed it in the chat and she's now brought it to questions. Does the panel feel that artificial is a term we should continue to use going forward? Could we change to digital? So instead of artificial intelligence, we're talking about digital intelligence. Or is this not important? Digital ethics is a prime example. Instead of ethics in artificial intelligence, correct language matters in my view. So this is an expressed view by Deborah. Should we agree right now that from today, it is no longer AI, it is now DI. It is no longer artificial, it is now digital. What's your thought, Ambelona?
Oh, let me explain first why it is artificial, why they call it artificial. We call it artificial because actually we teach machine to mimic human brain. That is why we say artificial intelligence, because we build the reasoning of human being artificially. So for me, artificial intelligence is okay. is okay for me. I don't have any issue with the artificial intelligence, but the problem is how we should build this artificial intelligence, how the principle that we should respect with this AI. All these things around that matters for me, but call it the artificial intelligence is okay for me because I understand that it's just because we want to mimic human brain in computer or in machine.
Chena, I saw you nodding. In agreement, or did you mean to put it sideways?
No, I completely, I'm nodding in agreement, because as rightly as Deborah said, language really does matter. And then it also means that, so I don't think we can end this conversation and say we're going to say digital ethics, but what we're going to actually want to unpack is what would be the difference between artificial and digital. What does saying artificial allow for us to have a conversation on, and what does digital mean? Because I think when you think about the conversation around digital, it can be an all-encompassing phrase that then would also, if you're thinking about how we've connected on the African continent, you're then thinking about like mobile connectivity, computer connectivity, you're thinking about everything digital, right? So then it is that extra level that Belona then talks about when you're thinking about artificial, that mimicry that then happens, the way the system in which it evolves. But also not to say that artificial intelligence is not a fully accepted term. It's very contested. If you look, there's work that my colleague from Mozilla did on called AI myths. AI myths. I'll type it into the document. But what he basically suggests is every time you see AI in the document, remove AI and then say machine learning or big data or like big Excel sheets, because then what we find is that the conversation itself is often complex, and some people will be selling AI as snake oil. So then that's what I'm trying to take us one step back, that we cannot at this point say let's stop AI at artificial and say digital, but what we then can begin to do is what do these terms really mean when put together or separately, and what do they allow for us to have a conversation about?
Yeah, thank you. So, bringing what both of you said, together, I think it's important within the frame of this question to say that digital is not necessarily artificial, right? Because it is possible for me to do something and it is digital, but I am not training the system to mimic the human brain or to be able to take certain steps by itself later. There's one more question by Deborah. We've got 2 award-winning questions asking participants today. It's between Deborah and Rabile. And I think we may need to do a poll to determine who the winner of the, 5 Sefa Amazon voucher is. I'm just kidding. So the question here is, can we discuss age 2? Youth are very different from people over the age of 30. I feel personally attacked here, but I'll just I'll take this. And young people are really included in policy decisions. This is absolutely true. But let me come to you. How do we make sure that young people, and I know there are 2 different definitions here. There is maybe even 3. There's a definition of the UN up to 24. There's the African Union definition up to 35. And there's the political definition. In some countries, the leaders are 60 plus years old. So let's cut off the political nonsense definition and stick with maybe the AU definition for a second. If you choose to, you can use the UN definition of 24. How do we involve young people in this policy discussions about their present and their future, especially when it comes to AI?
First of all, I agree that we should think about youth when we are talking about policy, but now how we involve them in the process, this is really a difficult question for me. But I think that there are some organizations that focus on youth. They really know what youth need. They really understand what young people need. I think we should work with those people who already know the behavior of young people, that understand youth, and then they will provide more information about their needs, and we can work on them to include youth in the process.
Chennai, I see that your snake oil comment has caught it because the video focus in the comments, but that was definitely spot on. This is what governments have in the budget documents that we've seen. It's the same relationship with surveillance equipment. In our monitoring of various budgets across the continent, you almost always find that governments actually list the name of a surveillance equipment according to how it is sold in the brochure. The Nigerian government, for example, budgeted, $60 million for a $40 million 2-year, an exact name of that product was what they used in the national budget. So it's the snake oil industry is not going to retire. It's just going to be fired up by AI. So youth and young people, how do we involve young people without playing the game of tokenism or assuming that we're speaking on their behalf?
So again, I'm so excited because this is something that actually did come out of my research, right? Because my research actually worked with gender and sexual justice activists who would be working with young people. And one of the key things they point out is that the accessibility of these spaces, we've had this call on a Zoom webinar, but are we going to then devise the recommendations that come out of it in a way that's accessible through WhatsApp, through TikTok videos, or through basic infographics? So that's like low-hanging fruit. And then also, secondly, to think about to what extent are we listening to young people? We get them into a room, and I always use the example of my nephew who's literally taught me about gaming and TikTok and everything. And I know there's a new fad because he's like, I've left Instagram, it's very boring. But to what extent are we listening to young people as people in position? Because we undeniably so, as much as we want to have young people in the room, we currently hold the power. We currently hold the power to determine who's going to be speaking on panels, who's going to have access to policy rooms, who's actually going to be having these access to institutions, and what it is that they're going to learn. So when I look back on my own question, I think about it, to what extent am I facilitating young people to be in this conversation? And particularly for me, it's young women. And so then I think one strategy I found useful has always been actually then looking at what it is that they're doing and then contributing to that conversation so that we don't speak on behalf of them, and then we support the work that is being done. There's a young women's initiative called Digital Girl Africa, and they did a fantastic tech and gender-based violence campaign over the 16 days, and I thought it was very interesting. And then I think lastly, when we think about youth participation, and I'll come back to it, is that the resourcing is very important, and we have to learn to start resourcing the informality or the creativity of young people. Young people are struggling to put together 20-page proposals that funders are requesting so that they can get a grant for $100,000. So at the end of the day, we hold that knowledge to then be able to define that strategy. So what are we doing in terms of either different business models, because we cannot consistently rely on funding, supporting business models that can support, yes, that's a Digital Girl Africa, thank you. Supporting business models that allow for young people to be creative in addressing these issues, and at the same time, challenging funding dynamics that would rather fund established organizations that would then speak for young people than actually then be able to say, no, we're funding young people. And sometimes young people, all they need is a cell phone because they can't do their work. But how do you put in a proposal that says, all I need is a smartphone for me to take videos and participate in these events? So I think we need to challenge ourselves in how do we facilitate young people to be in these conversations. And I think Paradigm does great work around that, and we can learn so many lessons from them. But I also hope they're making use of TikTok videos.
You can bet that my colleagues and I are listening, but you guys have made a very important point, and I'm going to put my colleague Thobekili on the spot, and I'm going to eat into our budget a bit, with this conversation, and I'm holding my hands together, hoping she won't get upset. Well, of course she won't be upset, because this is why we do what we do. We do have a platform that is, that can possibly empower young people who are, keen and keen or interested, in this area. We started the Digital Rights and Inclusion Learning Lab this year for that same purpose. So what I would say is, please, if you ever come across any young person, I mean, we're always on the lookout also, but if you come across any young person who you think has interesting ideas and has been denied funding by everyone, please let them talk to us. Thebekile is on the call. We will, be able to get them to work because, by the way, maybe this is now letting the cat out of the bag. Our drill program is our opportunity to catch everyone or every opportunity that typically drops off the radar. Right? This is a learning lab. It's a space where we future-proof things. So please, if you come across any young person, let them talk to us. And in this case, all you need to bring, no registration certificate, nothing else. Thanks, Gabriel, for sharing the link. No registration certificate. Just bring your knowledge and interest, and we'll have a conversation. We have an external advisory group that helps to look at the intent of the fellowship, how much is required, and all that. Because reality is, when we all, I mean, for the three of us on this, myself as a moderator and two of you as panelists, when you look back to your own career journey, there have been opportunities, like that, where somebody bet on you, literally. Okay. And I think it's something we need to do a lot more, and I agree very much with that. Thebekile says, yes, please. So we're looking for those young people. Let them talk to us, and we will, be able to, because in 5 years, in 10 years, their innovation, their resilience is what we can then see as emerging industries. Okay. We've got only 8 minutes left. Thankfully, there is only one question. Let me just check. Okay, there's one question. And I will want to ask, okay, I'll ask one of you. There are two questions. There's a general question, but let me take this one first. We're all concerned about the extent to which personal data can be used. Since we're all talking about human rights and to build AI models, we need huge amount of data, which includes personal data. How do we control the usage, and who decides the ethics? I'll give that to both of you. We'll start with you, Bellona, and then Chennai. Maybe 2 sentences? Would that be enough this time? Okay. Bellona, how do we make sure that our personal data does not become abused in the process of building big data required for building AI models?
Okay, I will reply as a researcher. I will say that now there is a field in artificial intelligence called privacy, where we mostly talk about differential privacy that help people to use your data in the way that at the end of the day, we won't know that we use your data. It means that we use you somehow like you are in anonymous, like we use your data in the way that we won't know at the end of the day that that is your data. So this is how I can reply to that question, that people who use personal data should make sure that they apply differential privacy rules when they build the model to ensure that we won't publish your personal data.
Yes, that would be a crime. And Paradigm Initiative, we're more than happy to find you a lawyer to seek redress in court if your personal data is abused, even for AI, maybe especially for AI. So Chennai, same question to you. How do we ensure personal data isn't breached in building big data models?
I think the challenge for me is not more so about personal data being breached. It's the effect of that design and it has on a person who fits a particular profile. My data may not have been used to determine that I do not qualify for a loan, but because I fit a particular profile, I don't qualify for that loan. I may be Black, I might be a woman, a certain age range. So I think to respond to your question, what for me is thinking about governance models that need to be developed in terms of like protecting not just personal information, but information and the impact that results as the use of these technologies. To think about accountability strategies. So in that case of, documenting wherever AI is in system, because you cannot know if a breach has happened, because what happens is that sometimes a breach happens and you never know about it because it's all sorted out at the industry level guidelines that they have. And then I think it's also about how do we hold the people who actually have our data accountable, and thinking about transparency of the solutions that they do provide. And then this requires perhaps Ambelona and I working together and doing an audit of a system to see what are the privacy impacts that are happening, and to move the conversation beyond the personal information being attacked, but actually thinking about the impact it has on a community who fits a particular profile and where it is being uploaded into.
Absolutely.
So those
absolutely.
are my solutions.
And I'm glad to hear that both of you are, working together. Thanks for the announcement. It happened here, people. They announced that right here on this webinar. We've got 3 minutes, and I will give you 1 minute each to one strong recommendation for human or digital rights organizations in Africa. When we say we're talking about AI and human rights, we're talking about feminist AI, what is the one recommendation you will make to a PIN? What's the one recommendation you make to a policy, a CPESA, all the organizations that work on digital rights in Africa? What is the one recommendation you make to them? I'll come with you, start with you, Ambelona.
Okay. In one sentence, think ethics before development. Don't hurry to use AI. Don't just follow the rest of the world to use AI. Take our time to ensure that the AI model or the solution that will be published will respect our rules, will respect our life, and respect us as Africans. That's all.
That's all. Mic drop. Thank you. Chennai.
I mean, just to add on to that, I think for me, what I would actually say is that there is need for civil society to be involved with a collaborative model. We cannot do it on our own, and we cannot do it with the traditional institutions that have been doing it for a very long time. And then also to move away from centering the technology, but to actually center the experiences of people. I think once we've got those two, we are able to come into the ethics issues, we're able to come into the procurement issues, because at the end of the day, it is about working together and centering people to think about what is the impact of these technologies as they emerge, because there's going to be a new one in 5 years.
Make that 2.5. This is the part where I thank you, Ambelona, and I thank you, Chennai, and I thank everyone who has spent the 90 precious minutes. This is that time of the year when people begin to say no to panels because they're shutting down. If you ask me after Friday, my answer will be no. My last panel for the year is on Thursday. After that, that's it, and I'm done. Those January requests are in the file. We will look at them after Christmas. There's a question from Deborah that we will not take, and I'll explain why. It's asking if anyone wants to speak at their personal experiences learned in our collective global experience of the 2020 pandemic. But what we will do is that we'll open that question after this webinar. We'll turn off our streaming, we'll turn off the recording, and then we will have, thank you, we will then have a healthy and safe space where people may want to share their experiences. But the promise we made is that we will end this at 12:30 West African time or 11:30 GMT, and we will do that in 2 minutes. I want to thank the people who are not on the panel, but my colleagues. My colleagues who helped to put this together: Gabriel, Rigobert, Sani, Thobekile, Angela. Thank you so much for also, just so you know, my colleagues Valerie also are taking notes. And what we will do, I don't know, okay, Rigobert is also here. What we will do is after this, we will sort of try to summarize the brilliance of Ambelona and Chennai into a readable, document, hopefully make available in English and French. But like Chennai advised, and as you've noticed from the nature of our work very recently, we don't do just 47 or 74-page reports. We try our best to make sure that, I mean, on Thursday, we'll be launching IETA, yay, our digital rights toolkit. And one of the things that we've done is not to let the cat out of the bag, but apart from being heavy on illustrations, we're also building a gaming environment around that. Our partner on that, is policy, and we're glad to have a chance to work, with you, Chennai, with you, Belona, and with other people on this call. So just to say Asante Sana, to say Nagode, to say thank you, to say merci beaucoup, to say thank you for making time, and also for everyone else who's on the call. The